right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Monitor Keeping Podcast. I'm Alan Stevens here with Khai.
How's it going, you guys?
And today we're just going to kind of be, talking about different monitor stuff. This is going to be kind of like a phone call between me and Khai, just for all of you to listen to. This is what happens sometimes 3 times a week, sometimes once a week. Seems like we fit it in. Now with the podcast, we cover a lot of stuff on the podcast for everybody. But
yeah.
So we'll get into some
most
stuff.
of the time. It's conversations at 2 or 3 in the morning. Luckily, we're on the same coast, so similar time frame. Even if it is crack of dawn, or not even the crack of dawn yet, it's still dark outside. But yeah, this conversation is going to be a little bit more on the kind of like on the fly or on the whim. We've had to kind of come up with something quick as we've had to postpone for technical difficulties for one of the guests we've had. So we're just trying to really make good usage of this time, and really this is just going to be kind of like Alan said, how it'd be more of a typical conversation that what we'd be having as the conversations we'd have normally would be pretty in-depth with stuff too, because we're just trying to really dissect everything, break stuff down. And this in a lot of times we have kind of like I'd say a topic, but this one's probably going to have a few topics where we're going to touch on a few different things. Actually, I do have a fair amount of questions that a few of the listeners have also sent me. Some people aren't really willing to sit in the hot seat just yet, and it's also getting them on is another difficult task in itself. So really finding the right timing. So some people are just sending in questions, and we'll have a section where we're answering some of your guys' questions as well. So in a sense, this would be another little Q&A thing as well, where we'll be fitting in some of your guys' wants and needs as far as what you're trying to figure out. All right. Now, I guess we're really trying to touch base with a lot of the beginners. So, mind you, there's going to be just questions that, if you're someone that's experienced, something that you've already kind of gone over, you're already really well experienced with. But we're trying to really get to just the guys that don't know any of this stuff yet, or they're really trying to figure it out, or some are confused. And one topic that I want to talk about are something very simple, and it's the difference between ambient temperature in usage and surface temperatures in usage. Now, okay, as a beginner, I often hear where essentially you're confused, or more so of just not understanding quite yet exactly the two differences in temperatures that you'll need. And so some people are saying, some people tell me it's 120, 130, 140. And then some people tell me it's 95 on the hot side, 100 degrees on the hot side, and that's it. Well, in instances, both of those are right if they differentiate which exact temperatures should be what and measured by what. Now, for the newcomers, your tools are going to be, a normal thermometer for ambient air temperature, or you're essentially trying to get what the air is in and around the bulb or on the other side, wherever you put the probe, right? And then you'll have your surface temperature, which is measured by a temperature gun. And this is often your little infrared gun that you have, where you're maybe several inches to a foot away from the actual basking spot directly underneath the lamps. And then you're going to hit it with the gun to see what your temperatures are at. That is surface temperature. Now, your ambient, or what you're measuring with the thermometer, let's say it's on the cool side, right? And you have a thermometer over there. You're aiming for high 70s, low 80s, something like that. That's a range you want. Maybe even at nighttime, I have some of mine go into the 65s. I don't really go anything below 60, but 70s is a good number for you as a beginner, okay? On the cool side at nighttime, or just on the cool side average, high 70s, something like that. Now your thermometer reading on the warm side, if it's right underneath the bulbs or kind of on the side of the bulbs, that's going to be right at around 95, 100 degrees, maybe even 105, 110, give or take. It really just depends on where the probe is. But let's say if you inch it right underneath, it's probably going to be a good 100. If it's about maybe I'd say 4 or 5 inches to the right a little bit, it's going to be more like 90s, and then as you move further away, the math deducts itself from being further from the heat, and then it's just going to be like 80s and where you're more of the overall temperature. Okay. So, those are things that you want to get accustomed to or get used to, differentiating between the two. So, you'll have a bulb, how you want the bulbs to work for you, because now we're talking about the source of heat. You're gonna crank in a bulb and you're gonna try to achieve good ambience first. You're just trying to achieve 90s, 95s on that hot side, 100 degrees, and then your ambient temperature, you're gonna get a feel of the basking spot's always roughly going to be about a foot away, maybe even 2 feet, 15 inches, something like that. And in some cases, only 6 or 7 inches away from the basking spot. And you'll determine your actual surface temperature area by the distance between the actual bulb and the actual spot. So let's say if it's a 50-watt bulb floodlight, and you have it above a slate rocker or something like that, and it's 10 inches away, and it's reading 115, right? But your goal is 125, 130. So your next step to then is either to lower the bulb a couple inches or to actually raise the basking spot a couple inches. Yep. And this is to actually bring the actual area up, because your ambient is still the same. So your usage doesn't need to change. Let's say if you've achieved that now 90, 100 degrees on that hot side, you're good, right? You're good ambiently. You're good where it's supposed to be hot enough for just the normal day for them, right? And then you have a cool side. Now, as you're calculating stuff, if your cool side is like 89, 90 degrees, then your cage is a little bit too hot. You'll have to figure out how to cool that side down or lower the heat there. And then what you're going to do is bring the surface temperature or the surface actual area, the basking area, closer to the lamp, creating a higher area for that animal there. Now that's how you're going to be adjusting, deducting, or basically figuring out your bulbs through the small wattage changes that you might need. And that, to me, in clarification, should have you guys understanding a little bit more on gathering ambient temperatures on what's correct, and then surface temperatures, applying them both together, and then having the right usage. Now, where surface temperatures are important and ambient temperatures are important, right? So you obviously don't want things to go too hot, and you don't want things to be burning your animal. So the distance is one thing, but you're not just going to say, hey, I'm used to doing 10 inches, 12 inches. It's always going to be like that. You're going to use your temperature gun every time, every single bulb you use, and you're going to hit it after it's been sitting on there for overnight or a day or so, and it's gathered temperatures, core temperatures that you can measure. And if it's 150, 160, 170, which you absolutely don't need, then your choice then would be to deduct and go lower, and the distance is going to be further away from the actual bulb and the basking site. So your precise temperatures would help you out very, very much instead of just whimming it. Now, you can have great ambience and have no surface temperature because you didn't put a basking area there. And so there's no way to get up close. It can sit underneath the bulb and the beam of the bulb. It'll get kind of warm, but not optimum temperature where they can get really, really hot. And that's the key thing for success in breeding and getting them to digest well. If you didn't have a basking spot that was higher than your normal ambient temperatures, your animal wouldn't digest well enough. It'll sit there kind of just like a blob with a bunch of food in its belly, not being able to digest. So having those temperatures differentiated that way, hopefully that'll help you guys out.
Yeah. Also, I think with some of the cages, just the design or maybe the house that it's in, Don't be afraid to experiment in your own setup with adding another low wattage bulb somewhere in the enclosure if necessary, because it can bring the entire ambience up of that cage if you're not getting hot enough, or even a smaller watt bulb. I've added 25-watt bulbs just somewhere in along the cage. And it has done a lot just to not only increase the hot spot, the basking spot, because you're increasing the overall ambience, but to bring that temperature up a little bit. So just an idea is something you might want to look into or experiment with as the seasons change. Because the other great thing about it, instead of depending on one bulb to do everything, is in the summer, you can just turn that one off. You can unscrew the bulb, take it out. Even in dwarf monitor cages where you might only keep one animal, it's just another very cheap option to help account for those different temps you might experience, depending, like I said, again, on the cage build, the temperatures in your house where you're keeping the animals, or with the season changes. Oh, and also what you use. A lot of us do like to use wood for our basking spots or cork tubes, but a piece of slate or a piece of rock is going to be hotter than that wood will be. So sometimes everything's good. The ambience are where you want them to be, but you're not getting that hot spot and you don't really want to go up in wattage. You can also play with, gluing a piece of slate on top of the wood, the highest wood piece, to achieve those temps.
Or and measured, right? Let's say if you had a piece of cork next to a piece of black slate, the same level, the slate's going to be a few degrees hotter, just naturally. I don't know why, but it's probably just because of the material that it is and all that stuff like that. But it's something to keep in mind.
Another point. This was. I guess I'll let the cat out of the bag a little bit. We had a recorded podcast that I jacked up. So we're still trying to figure out if anything is useful from that. But to share a little bit about some of the information in that podcast was the type of reflector that you use. If it's painted white on the inside or dull, it might not reflect as much light and energy, / heat, that something with a nice mirror finish will, or a nicer finish on the inside will. So something to take into consideration. Or if there's a lot of us that don't even use any type of dome or reflector. You can maybe increase that basking spot by adding that reflector in and pointing it downward. It's still going to have all the heat inside the cage if that's where it is. So it's not like you're really losing that heat. It's just going to help focus it a little more. So,
yeah, man, we're just we're just winging it.
Hey, it'll be good though.
Okay, now, getting into, I don't know, I'd say more along the lines of bulbs, right? I think I kind of touched on this a little bit where we covered some bulbs that we use right now. Most people are using BR30s, but some people still wing it with like spot bulbs if they use a nice distance, right? Yeah. Now, what's weird is I've seen people use bulbs like a big single bulb on one big huge monitor, and it still work. I don't know. It's quite. To find the right bulb and all that stuff like that, it will really just take you to buy them and try them and see how everything responds first. So, like for me, I personally don't use any of the 100 watts, 150 watts, 250 watts because most of my animals are quite small and they don't really have to have any of that. And I space out my bulbs, so I may still use a total of 150 watts, but it's spaced out between 3 or 4 bulbs, right? And that way I'm still achieving what needs to heat up a big 6 or 8 foot enclosure, but I'm also broadening out and spacing out that heat a little bit to cover the whole animal. basking rather than just a spot over its back. Now, I've been testing quite a few different bulbs over the last, I'd say, year or two, where I was myself just strict on par 38s, right? But it's been quite a few, I'd say now a good year of not being able to really find bulbs anymore. So, ordering online and things like that, finding what was useful to me was quite hard. And so, scouring through what was easy to find, I was able to look up these bulbs that were used by chameleon keepers, right? Now, also, I've seen other monitor keepers use them as well, and I've always wondered, man, like, how come the space is so close? Like, aren't you scared your thing's gonna burn, right? But I discovered these bulbs where, for example, these chameleons were basically burning their cast and burning their back, and burning their sides because our floodlights and basking lights, because they get so close to it because they're a tree animal, they're gonna, hover around it. We use these bulbs now that are BR30s and BR40s where I can have a much closer distance, and even 4 or 5 inches away isn't going to burn my animal. And so you're able to manipulate the enclosure a little bit if it's smaller, or let's say if you what I've been able to utilize is I put them in the farthest corner all the way to the left or the right of the enclosure, and I have a basking spot that's really close up there, and only that little tiny nook, it's like a fraction of the cage, less than 25% of the cage for sure. And that's that only hot area that's 90-ish, 95 degrees, right? 100 degrees. But the rest of the enclosure, the way that's designed and how those bulbs are up there, they don't get too blistering hot. And so I can use a couple of them up there, and they're making my cage just good enough without being too hot. So utilizing that should help out a lot with if you were able to find floodlight. There's still floodlights. They're just soft white. They're called soft white outdoor floodlights.
We might have touched on this before. I can't remember now, but I in my mind, I got this idea to try out like a 3-foot cube, basically, to make a cage that's, just a 3-foot cube, and to put the heating element basically in the middle of the cage, and adjust it. And I wonder if it would just kind of have an even heat more than like a 4x2 or 6x2 cage would, because we're traditionally putting one light at the far end and letting that be the hot spot, the basking area, and then, using the rest as the gradient. Sometimes, in my opinion, for some of the Australian stuff, especially during the breeding season, I want to keep those temperatures up, even on the cool end. And what I mean by that is low 80s down at the cool end in the daytime. I wonder if it'd be almost a more efficient design to just use that 3-foot cube, so to speak. Because if you're keeping 1 or 2 animals, it might not matter. When you start keeping a lot of animals, I'm trying to be as energy efficient as possible to make these things run.
It also has to flow, right? Like some of the bulbs I've learned I have to decrease in wattage as I'm either adding more stuff into there, or as let's say the temperatures are getting hotter through the day, and my temperatures aren't really controlled too much at the moment since the temperatures are more constant. They're not just blistering hot, right? And so, but let's say it does get up a little hotter. From winter, I've had to change my bulbs down from like 75s to 50 watts now. And then when it gets into the summertime, that's where those BR30s come in really efficient. They basically don't burn your animal. You can touch the bulb. As the bulb is on, you can hang on to that bulb for a good minute without burning your hand. That's how efficient that is to not burn you, but still create a basking temperature as long as you're close, though. That's the thing. You have to be really close. So to some people, it's scary, but to some, if you can work it out, it actually is a little bit beneficial as well. So But we offer different types of usages and bulbs to all types of people. Where, like for us, we have smaller enclosures, and they're kind of just built just for that. But some people with bigger enclosures, those BR30s aren't going to work. You know, they're like for somebody with a huge water monitor enclosure, maybe a couple of those on a moderately warm part of the enclosure to buffer out the cold. But let's say if you wanted to generate and use BR30s in a 16-foot enclosure or 20-foot enclosure, you're not going to have a chance because they're not that efficient. So in a sense, they're not that great if you have a giant enclosure. So using big mega rays or 250 watt bulbs spread out, spaced out, used properly. You know, some people use mini bulbs, like I'd say 6 or 7 little or more smaller bulbs that equal a bunch of that equal higher wattage, and then they're able to have a gradient that way. And then they turn off little by little. So I can have 250 watts running through wintertime, right? But let's say in summertime, I'm only going to need 100 watts. So instead of having to just deduct the whole bulb, if it was a 250 watt bulb, I can just deduct 25, 50, or whatever those bulbs that I use, 25, 30 watts, 50 watts, and just deduct it like that, keeping those other bulbs there, still having a decent gradient. But now I'm really, I also obviously I'm saving electricity. I took off 50 watts or 30 watts from this bulb that I don't need on right now because it's making it too hot. And you'll know by your thermometers if, you know, your cold side is saying 88, 90, 93 degrees, something like that. On a cold side, it's going to be a little bit too warm. And so you want to deduct and turn something off. And so, till that area reaches 78, 80, 82 degrees. Those are your more needs for your cool side temperatures. So,
you know, something else I wanted to bring up, a question that did come up. I was helping someone set up basically for a new monitor, and they weren't achieving the temperature that they wanted. Now they're getting a baby monitor. They had, I think, a 40-gallon glass breeder Exoterra type of tank, and everything seemed right as far as how I would set it up. But the temps weren't quite getting to where they wanted the temps to be. It turned out that basically the terrarium, the enclosure, was on a stand, and the person had put that stand over the vent in their bedroom where that's where the cold air is coming up. It was like a floor vent, and it's cooling down. That glass has no insulating properties. So if it's cold air hitting that glass, then that's going to transfer right into that cage, and it's going to mess with your temperatures.
It'll draw the cold. It'll suck the heat out. Actually, even
yeah. And so now you can make those work. That's not a problem. But in this situation, you had to rearrange the room. You know, it's like, well, you're now going to be competing with the heat coming off this cage in your room in the summer. So
you don't want to do that.
Right. Move your bed closer to the vent where that's going to help you sleep at night, and move the cage to a more stable part of the room where it's going to keep those temperatures better. So just something to think about for those people out there. Now, that is with a glass enclosure, where if you're using a 3/4 inch plywood, something like a PVC enclosure, you might not have that same issue. It insulates better, where it's not going to transfer that cold air or suck the heat out as much. So simple things to think about. You know, some of us use plastic totes too, and they're not very thick either. They're, you know, they don't have a whole lot of insulating properties as well.
Right. So when we, you know, us ourselves, like I still have baby lizards that are raised in 30, 40 gallons or something like that, or I have them in Exoterras and I have them in bin setups or small enclosure setups, right? We recommend, if you're really willing to, try a little bit of everything, see what holds best for you. But there's a reason why we say those glass enclosures, you know, with screen tops, stuff like that, essentially don't hold well.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. A lot of us started out that way is because that's where we're at the mercy. We're at the mercy of the hobby when that's all was really there, and we weren't really being taught to how to make enclosures and stuff like that. We had to really just learn from professionals that were really far and few and slim in between, And so now there's quite a few of us where this is almost like second nature to being a monitor keeper now once you get experience, right? And so just getting you guys onto this part without understanding what not to do, it does take away from your learning experience. So that's why I do recommend, hey, get an idea on what the glass light might be. And you realize on a cold night, that cage will just lose all its heat properties super fast, right? But in a wooden enclosure, you turn off the lamp, it's still going to keep that residual heat for quite some time, especially if the venting is very limited. And so you won't have to crank it on anything at nighttime. So then in terms for you save electricity. Your animal doesn't have to be hot at nighttime, and you're not cooking it anymore. You're now just you're now letting the animal cool down at nighttime, all that stuff like that. Humidity will do its natural properties of rising and everything while the heat's kind of cut off. And you'll essentially go through your normal motions. Now, when you have a glass enclosure, same thing with the humidity as well. If you have a screen top and all of that's just escaping, this is why we don't really recommend them as great enclosures. Now, all of us still, me and Alan ourselves, we have glass enclosures that are rigged with wooden tops. We have bins that are rigged with different tops to support a heat lamp inside. So we've taken something that wasn't working so well and essentially put a Band-Aid on it, sort of. And where that is now conserving heat a little bit, like for myself, right? Exoterra's just as garbage as 40 gallon because it has the same issues. You crank a bunch of heat into it, the screen top just allows everything to evaporate. And it also has the double venting, which are at the doors as well, and all the other creases in the enclosure that allows it to escape. And so for me, what I do is I just toss the top. I don't even utilize it anymore. And what I do is I have very thin plywood. I think it's the 1/4 inch plywood that's very, very thin. And I make a hole, attach a little heat lamp to it, slide it. It needs to be really thin because the Exoterra has these little ledges that fits the actual lid itself. And so if you can get plywood thin enough to fit in that crack and slide it in there, that enclosure now that once wasn't so great because it was dehydrating your animal, releasing all that heat and humidity, now is much more functional enclosure.
Yeah.
And then when you go from there, you then obviously you're not going to be utilizing an enclosure like that forever because it's a small glass enclosure. They don't make them very large. Eventually you might probably going to need a very large enclosure. And you may realize that, man, you're working against the heat and humidity and stuff like that so much because you're losing it all. So you'll get to a point where you want to conserve better. You want your animal to not have to deal with so much temperature fluctuation and be more consistent, things like that. You go with then much more sturdier built enclosure, something that's going to be lasting with heat and humidity. It doesn't allow everything to just escape very fast. It has small or more proportionate vents, air convection if it needs to, but it doesn't just expel all of the heat and humidity right away.
Right. And that works, and it gives you a little more control. It gives you a little more stability so you can adjust easier, I guess.
Yeah, you don't even for example, right? Like you don't have to crank a ton into a wooden enclosure compared to a glass cage the same size. So we're going to take a 6x2x2 in both wooden and then one in glass. The 6x2x2 is equivalent to what, 100 gallons, give or take? Something like that, right?
20 or so.
Something like that, right? And essentially it's big, right? It's a large enclosure. You would need maybe 250, 300 watts or more to heat that 100 gallon enclosure, right? That 6x2x2 if it was glass. Now, if it was a wooden enclosure, I'm currently only using two 45-watt bulbs. That's a total of 80, 90, maybe 100 watts, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so look at that. 300 watts, something like that, compared to only 75, 100 watts. You know, you're gonna choose the one that's saving you more electricity.
Right.
And so, you know, you're gonna have to really work on what's gonna work out for you in the long run as well. Sorry, bro. Go ahead and keep on going.
Oh no, that was kind of it. I have the glass enclosures I do use. Most of them, they're either on top of wooden enclosures that are heated, that have a heat lamp inside of them. So the top of or at the bottom of the glass enclosure stay relatively warm because of that. Also, they're up a little higher, and so heat rises. So for all the cages that are lower, usually I put the wood ones or the ones that insulate better lower, and I let the glass ones sit on top, and I just use that to my advantage. And then up in the loft area, which is up towards the top of the space where I keep things, there are glass enclosures up there, but it is because of that. It's intentional because the heat does rise. If they were wooded, they would almost hold too well, where I couldn't actually use a light bulb in them. I would literally have to let them, excuse me, allergy season. I would have to let them sit in the summer at their ambient temperatures because otherwise I'd be just, keeping them way too hot or running the lights at night. So in that scenario, the glass actually works in my favor. And then I just have to adjust or account for it in the winter by making sure it stays warmer up in that area. Yeah. So I've done that in certain ways, but just different ways of thinking. It's not that they're not usable. Just know the properties of the material you want to use or that you have available to you, and make adjustments. Whether it's light bulb,
and like in the community right now, we're talking about enclosures that are well sealed, well kept, sturdier, right? But guys that are in like Alabama or somewhere so humid, having a closure that breathes a little bit more, or their partial indoor-outdoor enclosures or things like that, they essentially don't need to be trapped, and you don't need to conserve any. You have so much flowing already around in the air, and so the chronic dehydration that your animal might get isn't really happening there because of the actual dense humidity that is in the air there in those southern states,
right?
And so that helps them out, and really keeping is a little bit different everywhere you go, a little bit.
Yeah.
And
I've had to adjust as well. Offer recommendations,
And even in the same state, I think most people know I've moved down to Southern California the last couple of years now, and so my actual humidity and where I live now is quite different from where I used to live before. And so describe where I lived before in San Jose, California. That place is maybe about 20 minutes from the marina or from the shore in Mountain View and stuff like that, where it gets an ocean breeze, gets a fog rolling through, and you get the bay breeze essentially, right? The humidity comes in and all that. It kind of helps out a little bit. Now, where I live now is very dry. I live in the valley now. I'm maybe an hour or about 45 minutes easy from the actual coast. So let's say that hour 20-minute difference, give or take, depending on which coast I'm going to, it makes quite of a difference in humidity. And it plays a part in my own setups and my own incubators and all that stuff. And so I have to really now play with the fact that things are much more drier, much more, I would say it's definitely not as dense humidity at all here. Maybe on a day where it's cloudy and hot at the same time, then I can get some humidity from those clouds, the sun hitting those clouds, and then the humidity, once it's built underneath the clouds actually make a cover where it's like a forecast over the actual standing humidity within the air, right? Us beneath the clouds. So it's essentially trapping all that. And that's the only time I get dense humidity here, is when it rains and it's sunny and it's cloudy all at the same time. And that's the only time. But
super dense all at once.
yeah. Yeah. So that's for me, it's the only time. Other than that, it's like 15, 20% humidity, 30% on a lucky time. And right now, luckily, the last few weeks, I don't know if it's spring taking its time or the weather just being finicky. There has been in the east and Colorado, it's like snowing again or something like that. People were telling me. And so my friend was like, yeah, I'm building a snowman right now in summertime or in May. And I'm like, wow. So I would say the weather is finicky and not making up its mind right now. And so instead of having consistent 80, 90 degree days, which I would normally have in April and May, like I did last year here, today is looking at the weather. It is only 72 degrees today. So for a Southern California area, you would expect it to be a lot hotter in my area. So it's only 3:30 right now, which is even the densest heat of the day, and it's still not that hot. And this has been actually beneficial for me, I think. I'm not fighting all this hot weather. I'm waiting for it. I'm letting it take its time. Maybe in July and September, shoot, okay, bring it. But, right now I love it's steady. It's not, well, sometimes when things are too hot, my animals are stressed, and I actually got to do different stuff, turn off all the heat lamps. And right now I'm still hanging tight on my steady. I don't have to turn on the AC, and things are still decently 70 degrees, 80 degrees, nothing too crazy like 90 and 100, not yet.
It's 90 here today, man. I'm a little jealous. I've noticed also that the Indonesian stuff does get a lot more stress. Not only the lizards, but the snakes when it gets hot. And then the Australian stuff, like the Centralian carpet pythons I have, and the Australian monitors, they're ready to go. It's like their favorite time, let things get a little hot and game on. So it's interesting having to account for those and treat them different. I've also started mapping out which enclosures I'm going to put animals in because of that, So which ones will keep the temperature and humidity that I want. And so that's kind of how some of my decisions are being made right now. Or keeping the the endo stuff on or in enclosures that are lower to the ground, keeping the Australian stuff up above them.
Yeah, I'm about to do a whole bunch of readjusting myself. So I have a guy. I might as well shout him out on here. His name's Luis, and he's in Southern California, and his Instagram's reptile_hut. But he's my cage guy. He's the guy that I kind of give my plans to. We work them out together, things like that. And essentially whatever I need solidified, because I don't always have the tools to do everything nor the space. He's really doing it for me, and he has been for a little while. But what we're currently doing is I have issues with, I actually don't have issues. My animals have issues with each other. And so with the mangrove and indica species, there's a few reasons why people don't breed them. And one of them is that they're jerks to each other. In and around the breeding process, dominance, cage aggression, not enough space, stuff like that. And mine, some of them are all frantic because they're all wild caught. I don't have any captive bred ones to really work with. I do have a couple that I bred myself prior, but they're not exactly ready yet. And so, or they're not the right species. And so, the ones that I'm trying to breed, let's just say my Koli or my Khai Island mangrove type of monitors, those are all wild caught. And the girls are really mean to each other. Like they'll attack each other right out of the cage. And the male, he'll play nice all of a sudden, and then he'll charge them, and I kind of stress out. I pull the female if it's too bad or if she's not smart enough to get away. Things like that. But these cages are to help me get them used to each other a little bit more. So that's what I've been doing is I've been kind of rebooting some of my enclosures a bit. Since we're still on those enclosure topics now, I have 3 of my enclosures will have partitions in them. Some of them are already small enough where they're just going to be for solo animals or for the smaller stuff. But all the 6 and 8 foot enclosures have partitions being made now for them. And so one's already in, one's just finished being made. And really, it's just some. It's like I don't even know. It's almost like zoo grade material fencing. It's black. It's coated. Really, really nice. It's what
coated.
One that Jim Hackett stuff used. So it's not like that sharp galvanized chicken wire that's going to rub their face off. It's not soft, but it's smooth, and so it's perfect for what I want to use. I actually was pretty. I was being a little Kyle about the specific one that I needed to use. So I told him, I was like, hey, man, I'm going to send you a link. And please find this one and apply this one because I don't want any other type of mesh. And all they are is just that sturdy type of zoo type of mesh that a lot of big monitor keepers use or even for big birds, things like that. And they're really sturdy, hard to, bend and things like that. And so and they're made with a door that's about 3x3. And it's a swinging door that I can lock close if I need to. And essentially these animals can go back and forth when I want to have them go back and forth, but more so if I will need to just introduce them to each other without them killing each other right on contact, that's what my partition wall is for. I call it my assurance wall because it's giving me some assurances on them not killing each other and them killing themselves and all this stuff like that. And so, I just want them to be more safe. And then right now, my whole part is the introductory leads into combat, right?
Yeah.
And so I want to avoid the combat. And so what I'm doing is popping them together and having that partition wall, letting them just get used to each other's smells. And I don't know how long I'm going to do it. Maybe some are going to click and in a couple of weeks they'll tame down with each other, or maybe it'll take forever and it's only going to happen and they're going to be right next to each other all the time when she's going through vitellogenesis and she's going through that part where it's time to mate. And that's what I'm wanting to find out. I've actually never done partition enclosures before with big monitors. I have done them with some snakes back in the days. Like I had small enclosures where I would let king snakes through, but those are king snakes. But in the same sense, you're trying not to have animals kill each other and only introduced in a specific time, And so this is what I basically had my king snake separated until I noticed the female was ovulating, and then I introduced the male at the right time. So
this is history I didn't know, Khai. This is snake
I used
breeding
to be a
stuff.
snake guy a little bit before all the monitors. I used to keep snakes. I mean, in addition, like everybody that I worked with too was more into snakes, and I was into the monitor lizards. I guess the monitor lizards back in the days were, still considered like hard or things like that. And so,
we're getting there, though. We're getting there. Yeah. One day, just like water monitors, no one was really breeding them in the past.
Right.
There was a time.
Yeah.
But now the wealth of information is out there.
And I don't want to give up, right? I don't want to be like, oh, I'm not able to do it. I'm just I'm going to throw in the towel. I've only had them for a year. I've already had them all nest and lay on their own. So I have that down. It's not like that's anything different. It's just hooking the male up at the right time where he's not trying to rip off any limbs. It's like, come on, bro. And, yeah. So this partition wall, I'm hoping that it'll work, give you new experience, new ideas on how to have them approach each other. I guess that's my main thing is I don't want to freak the male out. I don't want to freak the female out. they basically are going to be apprehensive from the get-go. And that, I think, in turns leads to the fighting. Dominance, asserting each other, asserting one over the other. One's not willing to be dominated. And so, it's kind of like, damn, they're going to basically now fight until the other one dominates the other one. Some of these, I'd say, behaviors and just how they act naturally, I actually don't have a clue on what I'm really paying attention. Like, it's what I see, and I've tried to decipher, all right, this is this behavior, and okay, this is the right one. And when we talked to Jake the other day, and he was mentioning to me or to us about, just like the tongue flicking and the right arch in the back, and the just like that's basically going to decipher the next 5-10 minutes is what's going to happen. And that's basically what I was experiencing. So I would love to get down where he can pinpoint a behavior to what's going to happen. You see how, how
that was interesting. Yeah.
And, I'm really trying to catch on to that because obviously not having my animals, not having the Khai Islands for more than a year really now, a year is not that long. I mean, sure, it is quite some time. It's a whole year, but having these animals and learning them and all that stuff like that, I'm really getting them into maturity. So I got them when they were roughly 15, 18, 20 inches. So I would guess that they were a year, 2 years old, give or take. Right. So now they're into their sort of, I would say, prime.
Yeah.
Getting into their first good years of nesting. I've got a couple of them to lay. Now, all that's good. Basically, nothing is needing to be done other than pop in the mail, but he's just not working right. So, yeah.
Always got to be something.
Yeah, man, that's that wrench that I was talking about. Basically, think you're doing everything right. You're learning your girls, getting them to do what you need to do on a cued timing. Getting the cued timing to do is also impossible for one. Getting mangroves to do it or Indo species to do it cued in when you kind of just, what you're kind of do, take the food away, do it for this certain amount of time, bring it back up, the humidity, all that, right? All that cued in works like 6 out of 10 times for me,
Yeah.
It doesn't always flow right, or I don't know what I'm doing wrong maybe, but yeah, it's a headache.
So, man, there's a lot to get into that we could go, but maybe. I'm thinking, we should probably save that. So, for all the listeners out there, Khai was just talking about, when a wrench comes in, we go from the ground up, study it, basically throwing everything out the window sometimes, trying to start from scratch and just losing all faith in ourselves. And
figuring out what we're doing and then figuring out what we're not doing and then do that.
Right. And more likely than not, we're actually pretty much on the right track now. It's just when something goes wrong, you doubt yourself, you doubt everything. And so I'll bounce these things off of Khai, and he'll kind of reel me back real slow, and give me that encouragement. Hopefully I've been the same way. And then we talk about maybe making minor adjustments. And so recently I did this with Khai because I've been keeping the Indonesian dwarfs for about 2 years, maybe a little longer. And I really haven't had any luck with them. And maybe I've been a little spoiled by the Australian stuff, but I was really getting nowhere. And so while the animals are alive, I was saying to Khai basically, okay, let's go through this. What are you doing with your endo monitors? What's your mindset? What are you thinking about? And he kind of led me through what he does. A little, basically what do you call it? A chart even? A diagram?
A line graph, picture graph.
On how you...
It's a dotted line graph / timeline / weather chart / feeding chart / humidity chart. Oh man, It's basically all of that, all overlapped on each other. this is how my brain thinks. And, and I didn't get this from I got this from like, the masters and other people that are doing it. And I needed direction and discipline. And I couldn't just, what I meant, I mean, I have discipline and I have direction, but what I meant is like the animals need it, and so what I needed to do was pinpoint the year, and it wasn't even actually 12 months. How much I had you do almost 2 years of timeline.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So, and this is how it works, where you're not preparing your animals just the month before or the 2 months before. You're preparing your animals months, like half the year, and you're really getting down to the nitty gritty on when precisely how much they're going to feed during the precise time of the year. And for example, there's northern hemisphere type of cooling and heating for your animals when it comes to breeding, and then there's also the southern hemisphere, which you'd be copying stuff from that area and trying to, imitate how the weather and stuff would be there. So most of us are using a northern hemisphere one, where, like example, we'd be doing the colubrids, cooling them down for the winter time a little bit, right into fall, into winter. And then maybe at the end of winter, you're going to warm them back up. Just something like that, right? You took them down for a couple months, or took them down for half a month, maybe sat them at a steady cool for a couple months, and then brought them back up, right? That's how a lot of us do it. Now, you can sort of do this with your monitors, but you'd have to pinpoint it at the right months and feeding. I'm not going to get into all that currently, but for example, that's basically what we're doing, where even though he wants to breed in the normal time that they'd be breeding for the southern hemisphere, which is like October, November, all the way into even April and May, that's basically when a lot of the animals over there are breeding. That's why you see in the United States, many people that have monitor lizards, they're all laying right now within this last several months. Okay. They do and lay on other parts of the year as well, but majority of them would have laid within the last 4 or 5 months. Now you're taking that to your advantage. If you're trying to breed within that time frame, you are being very strict on the diet months prior to that. And so, like I said, it's not anything where you're drawing out just a couple months. You're drawing 6, 7, 8 months, almost 12 months back, if you want to really get into how strict the diet and all that stuff like that's going to be.
So I'm giving Khai a little message. You guys can't see what I'm doing, but I'm and basically this year it worked out. So unintentionally, I've been putting my Indonesian species through that, and it just took them. These were wild caught animals. They were coming from Indo, and they needed to adjust. Basically, they were born at a certain time over there. They had to, they're off from their natural life cycle, which is over there. They're born at a certain time, which means they would probably be introduced to certain food sources at certain times throughout the year. So now when they make that journey over here, and I have to reestablish them, basically it's like some serious jet lag, you got years and years and years of these animals doing their thing and producing their there's some of those wild instincts in these babies, even if you get them young, that you got to bring them over here, and it's retraining them essentially. So I think that's what's going on. I think they just take a little longer, and once you get them kind of flipped from what Khai was saying, from a southern hemisphere type of reality in your care to a more northern hemisphere way of keeping, then once they adjust, and it might take a little longer, then you can really start hopefully seeing progress with them. Now, I still have a lot to do.
Staying on task, because you can't just bounce back and forth between when you want to breed them. It's now that's going to kind of be the steady,
Right.
Like, man, I don't want to breed my monitors during summertime, Okay. But I have a feeling they will because they just do. Last year they threw me off, but I've had a female from the end of January, beginning of February lay, and then in March lay again, the end of March. So that was 60 days in between two different clutches, right? So that's almost a back-to-back, basically, right? And then now on another clutch. And then if I stop her now, don't introduce the male again, but if she just keeps on developing, what I did is I think I opened what we're learning is that I opened the cycle, right? We started over. We basically went from the cooling thing. Remember how I told you I went down to 60s? I just stopped messing with my wintertime, and I used it in my advantage because my room and house wasn't going to get any colder than 60 degrees naturally anyways, right? With all the other heat lamps on and things like that. And if we run a little heater or whatever, or just naturally, it's not going to run that cold. And so I let myself get really cold. I took back all their feedings, and from the end of December, so January, February, March, I was really strict on no feeding, like barely any food, a little bit of maintenance. Took them down from pudgy to pretty lean, super lateral folds. Just their tail base still healthy and thick, but everything else on the animal is super lean. And then I took them all back this spring, and now things are going off again. Some of them started really early too, where, dude, in that 1.5, 2 months was all they needed. But once February and March came around, and it's naturally started to get warmer here anyways, they just kept on going. So I don't know if I'm going to stop them. I think I should, because if I kept going and then I wanted to breed again during the real time, I'd have no break. And then my animals would just be dead, or they'd be so tired. Yeah. So I'm going to stop them this summer. I'm probably just going to let them cool, regain stuff. It basically reset. Fall, going to condition them a little bit more, and then hopefully breed them again in this next, what do you call? It's the time, right?
Yep.
All right, you guys. So this one we're going to have to cut this one short and sweet real quick. Hopefully we're able to give you guys a fair amount of information. We'd like our brothers over there doing other parts of the in the NPR network to have their own time as well. And so we'll see you guys again. I actually would like to do more Q&A stuff. So if you guys happen to have a fair, decent amount of questions now, having 20 to 30 may not be what you need, because, we're not going to be able to do that within the 2-hour time frame roughly that we have most of our podcasts, but a good half a dozen, maybe 10 questions, something where we might not have answered before, something new, different species, new topics. We're really looking for a beginner in all types of species, so we can kind of cover stuff for you, That way things are all lined up. If someone asks for roughnecks like we just did yesterday, bam, we got roughneck ones.
Right.
Someone asks for non-monitor stuff, we have a non-monitor one. We have
That'd
Savannah
be a good one.
We have a Savannah one now, and so things like that. We're looking for you if you are a beginner and or you have questions, even intermediate, and also you have adults too, and you want to go to the next step. Let us know. Shoot us a message, and we'll go from there. All right.
All right, guys. Check out the MoreliaPythonRadio.com website. Check out their shop and their Patreon, as well as the other podcasts they are bringing to you. And support USARK. We appreciate you guys listening. So hopefully you'll stay with us, and we'll get some of your questions and cover some of the topics that you want to know more about. All right. Thanks, guys.